I was hoping for a little better turnout, but then I realized that it's the first sunny day in the month, and parking is really easy down here, and you have to navigate through everybody on substances to get here. So we're not doing too badly. We're not doing too bad. This book is a monster, and if you look at the size of it, you can understand why. The last time I gave a book launch author reading was 4 years ago, April 16th. And this was the last book of the Casebook of Dr. Sabata series. And so I'm a big proponent of the Hemingway law. The Hemingway imperative says you just have to keep writing, because if you're not writing, you're not doing anything useful. So you may well ask, where have I been? Because it's been 4 years, right? And the answer is, I've been writing 3 books. Now, you can probably appreciate the fact that that first book is a big book, and Kenny's Cabin is a little book. And Poetry of the Senses, which we don't have here, by the way, because the printer, because I changed the cover and they didn't do it in time, is a tiny book. So most of the time went on this book, which is why it's the one that I put up for the author reading. And so the question is, what's the treasure? And what are these other places, and where are they? And why did I write a special book about them? And so we will speak of the physics of time and space and the metaphysics of travel and meaning in the writing of it all. I had written travel books before. In fact, I hitchhiked around the world for 5 years when I was a young man, and became an old man in the process, and wrote this quadrilogy, this Cartwheels quadrilogy, as the first kick at the can. But I've written other travel books too. There's one on, should have had a pointer too. One on samurai on Japan, one on Madagascar, one on island nations in the Pacific, one on the American West, one on, in two novels, one on the Amazon and the Himalayas, and one, of course, on New Zealand. So, how does this one compare to the other ones? It's pretty good. Pretty good. And these are places that I've written about. There's 36 places, 6 continents in Oceania, and we went to them for 1 month a year each, because I used to work, if you talk to anybody else in this room, at the local hospital in a menial position. And one month a year I got time off, and I would go to one of these places, and then I would come home, and I wouldn't write about it until this last year, right? So that's where we're at. And I went with this person here. This is my loving wife and soulmate, Robin. This is where we first got together in the Indian subcontinent. I ended up peddling these guys around because they got tired. And then I went and met Robin again a year and a half later in New Zealand. And she came home with me, so so here are the stories, and I'm just going to go through them briefly on each continent. There is Haida, West Coast Trail, Santa Fe, New Orleans, Mississippi, New York, and Montreal. The first one is about our trek, our West Coast Trail trek in 1989. And another thing I have to tell you is that I have been busy in other ways the last 4 years. Just in the last year, I've had 27 publications in various literary journals. And so this one here was published in Wilderness House July 1st, 2024. This next one from the Charlottes was published in the Maple Tree Literary Supplement in winter. It's an Ottawa journal. This one hasn't been published anywhere but here. This is our New Orleans trip in '91. And this one appeared in the Montreal Review, because it's about Montreal. It's the earliest one in August of 23. We were there in 2006. Santa Fe hasn't been printed yet. The New York one hasn't been printed yet for a bunch of reasons. And the Mississippi one hasn't been printed yet. But we, two buddies of mine and I, this Robin didn't know on this one, went to Arkansas to a blues festival. And we ended up in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and we have no idea how we got there, but it was a good story. In Central America, there are two places in Mexico, one story about Belize and Guatemala, one about Costa Rica, and one about Cuba. Robin and I went to Islas Mujeres for our honeymoon in 1986. It was magic. We went to Cuba in 1990, when you could get a cigar at a decent price. We hitchhiked through Costa Rica in 92, and we traveled incredibly densely through Guatemala and Belize in 97. Now, Robin's sister, Nikki, flew from Thailand via Sumatra with 4 different kinds of malaria and a broken heart. And we took her to Mexico, to Vallarta, Navidad, in 1997. In South America, there's Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Peru, and Venezuelan stories. When I was a resident in my final year and studying for my fellowship exams, everybody was studying for their fellowship exams, except me. I, instead of studying for my fellowship exams, got Robin on a plane to Brazil, and we went to Rio de Janeiro, and I sat in a hammock for 2 weeks before I had my exams, and still passed them, which pissed everybody off. Anyway, the story about that is called The Urge is Strong Today. There's a story that occurred in Chile in 93, a narrative of Peru from 1996 called El Cuento de Pasa, and that appeared in Synchronized Chaos in April of 2024. There's an Argentinian journey, It Takes Two, in 2003, and a reasonably dangerous Chavez-filled exploit in Venezuela in 2006. 2 chapters are from Africa, one in Namibia, one in Botswana. And at this point, I'll have to tell you that I have published other stories of these geographies in other journals. Okay, so this one has taken a shine to me for some reason and publishes everything I send them. It's called African Writer. They keep asking me to send them a photo, and I never do, because I'm afraid that they're not going to take another story from me. Anyway, they're good stories, and they like them, so there you go. And then Smoky Blue Literary Arts Review published a story about my ascent of Kilimanjaro in September 2024. But these two in this book, one is about taking my father-in-law on safari in the Okavango in 1996. And that was published in a South African literary journal called Botsotso in October of 24. This is Diamonds in the Dust, the travelogue about Namibia. These are my photos. And this is up in a town called Upul on the Angolan border. And this man on the left is 82 years old. And he didn't know it because he had no idea, but we had to go through what happened locally to figure it out. And the 19-year-old woman on the right was one of the most stunning creatures I've ever seen in my life. And she just kind of gave me permission to take a photo, and I was just smitten. So that actually appeared just a few days ago in the Kalahari Review. A lot of places in Europe are in this book. I'll go through them for you. As well, I published other European stories, mostly Russia and Eastern Europe, or Soviet Union, before the walls fell. And this was the Mantelpiece, which is a literary journal in Iceland. In for some reason the editor likes me, so she publishes my stuff. There's this one about Romania, and this one about a little boy who was selling Soviet pins underneath his jeans jacket in Novgorod in the Soviet Union. He's probably a multi-millionaire by now. So these are the European stories. Remember that one, Jeff? So one of them is a trip to Tuscany in '97 called Rosso Bianco. And that's Lurch, that's the waiter. One of them is in Piedmont, called Il Miracolo. And one is a story called Diamond Girl. It's a story about how I sourced it. I hadn't bought Robin a diamond for her forever. And then I sourced one in Boise, Idaho for some reason. But they insisted that I had to go to Belgium to pick it up. And she had to bring it home in her brassiere. And we did that. And then I realized we could have brought more. So this one was published in New English Review. And I kicked myself because a week after I gave them permission, the Brussels Review wrote and said they wanted to publish it, but they wouldn't because it was already published. There's a story about Israel, 2009, where someone in the back vented all my wine while we were gone. Ralph, thank you. A Movable Feast is about a story that I went to Paris for a conference, and I had an extra day, so I walked across the city with a backpack, and I filled it full of foie gras and cheese and all kinds of other stuff. And you have to read it because the ending is kind of criminal. This is a story of a man whose generations died out. He was the last owner of the chateau. It was very hard to read. Just as hard rendering was a conference I went to in Warsaw called The Court of Hamburg. And that was published in A Thin Slice of Anxiety in June of 2024. We went to Sicily, and I noticed online that there was a Sicilian count of Norman extraction. He had long hair, and blue eyes, and he had a palace in downtown Palermo. But he would rent out his sister's bedroom. And I thought, well, why not? And you should have seen this place. It was amazing. So this is called the Ponte. Went to Bordeaux in 2018 to Chateau Yquem. Went to Georgia in 2018 and made a special trip to Joe Stalin's hometown. And that was quite amazing. And then moving on into Asia, there are two stories there, one about Cambodia, one about Laos. And there are other stories that have appeared in other journals. Mostly India, within the last couple of years. And this one just appeared yesterday. It's actually a podcast about the Annapurna trek that Robin and I did in Nepal. And there's a wrinkle in it. I don't know if you can see it, but it's sort of third, fourth line in, fourth line in. So that was yesterday. The two stories that are in the book, one is about Cambodia, and one is about Laos. And then Oceania has a fairly compact place in the book with Seychelles and Mauritius, Borneo, Malaysian Borneo and Brunei, Pitcairn Island and remote southern islands of French Polynesia, and the western islands of the Galapagos. And as well, there are other Pacific stories that have appeared in other journals in the last couple of years. So one of them is called Palm Pilot, and it's about a triple entendre when you read the story. And that appeared in Whitcraft in May of last year. There's one called The Empire Strikes Back about Brunei, and that was in the New English Review. There's one about the Galapagos, which I haven't printed anywhere else, so you'll get to read it here. And one is called In the Sweet By and By, which was a trip to Pitcairn. We actually took an ATV and it looked like that. And then finally there was The Way of the Dodo, which took place in Mauritius and Seychelles in 2019. So, in every book launch, you have to have an author reading. And depending on how time goes and how tired you get, I've got one or two, maybe three. So the first reading is about my sister-in-law, Nikki, and her broken heart, and her discovery of a beverage. So I'm going to just read that to you now. Nothing ever happens in Mexico until it happens. William S. Burroughs, the cadaveric heroin junkie writer who shot his second wife in the head while attempting a William Tell stunt on a drunken Mexico City bender in 1951, described Tacolandia. In Mexico, your wishes have a dream power. When you want to see someone, he turns up. He missed the part about even if you didn't want to see someone, he turns up. On the beach of Bar de Navidad that day, a bright silver convertible Jeep Renegade came hurtling over the scrub and almost collected us on an uninhabited beach north of town. The driver wore mirrored aviator sunglasses and not much else. It was only when he shouted my name that I recognized him as a former colleague from Victoria, messed up in Mexico and living on refried dreams. He stood out like a punk guitarist in a mariachi band, oozing decay. I'd seen this movie before. Jamie looked after our house and dog while Robin and I were in Chile 4 years earlier. We returned to find layers of candle wax around the hot tub, rubber chickens swinging by their neck in our closets, and deep grooves of panic in the hardwood floor. The dog was never the same. I bought him a beer in the nearest cantina and spent 2 hours squinting at what he was trying to tell me. I'm the worm at the bottom of the bottle, he said. In Mexico, life is cheap, death is rich, and the buzzards are never unhappy. Death can be found in many things, and Mexico extends beyond its borders. 2 months after we returned home, they found Jamie's body in the bathtub on the west coast of Vancouver Island. There were layers of smoldering candle wax around the porcelain rim. But none of us knew this. It was coming on New Year's Eve. Back in Barra, we passed a billboard advertising La Gran Valla de Fin de Año, the great New Year's Eve dance. All, but especially Nixie, were looking forward to beginning a new life in a new year. We arrived at the Jarro Beach Sports Bar after dinner, around 8 p.m. They'd packed the place with locals, farmers and fishermen, wearing their best jeans and raffia cowboy hats, and their spouses and girlfriends in their best casual dance gear. The Banda Conejos, mariachis, took the stage, named for the rabbits from the surrounding campo. On this most magical last night of the year, they would sing and play their violins, guitars, guitarrones, vihuelas, and trumpets, and their hearts out with perfect pitch and harmony and feeling. Our cover charge hadn't provided for free liquid refreshments, but these were available by purchasing tickets. I bought a roll for a few pesos and asked Robin and her sister what they'd like to drink. What do they have? Nixie asked. Beer and tequila, I said. Tequila? Magic water for fun people, I said. Blue agave for the blues. I don't think that's the answer. Tequila may not be the answer, but it's worth a shot. Every shot goes to your head. Some memories need assassins. I knew all about tequila from hitchhiking through Jalisco in my former life. Standing in the wooden bed of an old truck, we drove through endless high rolling hills of giant slate blue agave hedgehogs that contrasted volcanic soil underneath blood red from all the tequila gods of Jalisco crash landing on their radial spear blades. We were tossed on an ocean of 2-meter-high mezcal pineapples, each one having to wait a dozen years until its heart would be cut open in the sows of sacrifice. After baking, it tasted like yam candy. When a maguey heart is fermented, it makes a light foam white wine known as pulque. It was sacred before the conquistadors arrived, but sanctity changed forever after that. The Spaniards put an edge on everything, and they put pulque to a still. You just can't do that to a plant that's pollinated by bats without becoming batshit crazy. 1 tequila, 2 tequila, 3 tequila, 4. I'll have a tequila, she said. The mariachi rabbits introduced themselves with a patriotic flourish. Ser mexicano es un orgullo, pero ser de Jalisco es un don de Dios, the band leader roared. Being Mexican is a pride, but being from Jalisco is a gift from God. They fired up the traditional music of Jalisco in non-stop succession of greatest hits, other distillations of Mexico, God, and their own suffering. Love, heroes, machismo, politics, cockroaches, betrayal, and death. Maria Isabel, el son de la negra, el mariachi loco, la negra Tomasa, el borracho, Mexico lindo y querido. Songs that made you wish you'd been born there. I handed Nixie her first tequila and showed her how to follow a sip with a bite of limon wedge dipped in salt, and how transient are life's tartness and tears. I'm not sure I can dance to this, she said. A few sips said she could. Nixie spun around the dance floor in time to the music, happy to be alive. A half hour later, she mined for a second round of refreshment. Here's another tequila, Sheila. I handed her a cactus juice. How do you feel? Sublime, she said. But sublime was what could choke you. After a second round, Nixie was meeting local people on the dance floor. Her language skills had improved, although her arms were doing most of the talking. The third tequila spun her off into La La Land. She was a one-person show, dancing to the music she couldn't hear, singing lyrics she didn't know. The 300 million agave plants that Mexico harvests each year have become infected by a blight caused by the agave weevil, the vector which infects the plants with bacteria and fungi. They call the disease tristeza y muerte de agave, depression and death. This has made tequila very expensive. Tequila farmers are planting corn where their agave used to grow, but the winds of change have also blown GMO contraceptive kernels across the border from the U.S., infecting Mexican corn with the inability to reproduce. The arts of Mexico are heavy with the weight of the past, of gods that demanded the sacrifice of 1,000 beating hearts in a day, of a world that ended every 52 years, of warriors who rushed into battle wearing the heads of jaguars, or clothed in the flayed skins of their human victims. This is not the place to fuck with 1 billion corn tortillas a day, or 80 million liters of tequila a year. The red volcanic soils of Jalisco grow blue agave for tequila and green beans for coffee. The coffee is for the things you could change, and the tequila for the things you could not. Nixie was still working through her own cannot space, still more about the journey than the destination. The destination was coming. See no weevil, hear no weevil, speak no weevil. Back on the dance floor, Nixie had sourced a 4th glass of mezcal. It was too much tequila, or not quite enough. The planet spun on its axis, and Nixie spun on hers. All that Coriolis acceleration twirled my sister-in-law into a double distilled wasteland from which there was no return. 1 tequila, 2 tequila, 3 tequila, 4. Nikki's tequila sunrise late next morning stirred slowly across the sky and said goodbye. The canned mariachi music in the courtyard below was too loud, and the Mexican sun outside was too bright. She had been on a crash tequila diet. So far, she'd lost an entire day. What happened? The tequila had wiped the memory and other utilities from her hard drive. I thought that stuff would wake me up. But no. Brother and I agreed. So that's 1 tequila. Now, the second book, Treasury is a creative non-fiction, narrative non-fiction. Kenny's Cabin is a novella, so it's fiction about a real cabin. It's a short book, but it's a good book. And Kenny's Cabin is in Berkeley Sound, not quite there, but pretty close. That's it there in the upper right-hand corner. So if you're okay with it, how are we doing for time here? I'll read you a little excerpt from that. You okay with that? Okay. All right. Day 3. The sea fog was bone-chilling cold, A weak solar headlight rose through the narcotic mist, dissolving gray veils. Islands re-emerged as wraiths from a wall of nothingness. Why do old men wake so early? Is it to have one longer day? The eternal void filled with infinite possibilities. Dasco returned from the coolers on the deck with 6 cartons of eggs. Man does not live by bread alone. Intonation was important, especially when it was cold. The men were silent as they dug into Dasco's famous prawn omelets, sourdough toast, coffee, and guava juice. Halibut? Kenny proposed. Everyone pushed away from the non-meat. Carpe diem does not mean fish of the day. Daz grabbed his survival suit. Where to, Skip? Eli asked. 7 Mile Bank, Kenny said. Right on tie change, just for the hell of it. The old man in the sea took overkill out past Cape Field towards Tokyo for almost an hour. Kenny pulled the throttle back, paused it in neutral, 1/1000, palmed it into reverse, and back to idle in neutral. The sea danced under them, swelled, and rollers rolled like the wandering remnant of some perfect squall by the wet of the wind. Dasco's gills turned a vivid shade of green. On it, Kenny dove into the cuddy cabin and re-emerged with 2 large home-built zero-speed fin stabilizers and deployed them on each side of the boat. The rock and roll calmed into a slow samba. Dasco's gills flushed the bile into blush. Kenny went back down into the forepeak and returned with 2 6-foot Shimano halyrods and pin squall 230 level wind wind reels wound in a 100-pound test braided line. He assembled each rig in the port and starboard rod holders, attached a white scented Gibbs Delta Hallyhog cured tail lure and 40-ounce sinker weight to each rig, adjusted the drags, and dropped their business ends into the deep. We're here fishing, he grinned, loaded up a stogie. Eli and Daz surveyed the surroundings. They were out of sight of land. The sky was overcast in heavy gloom. Except for the odd gull or other lone seabird, they were alone with themselves and the sound of the wind and the sea. Both men peered over their reels like something was going to happen. If you look long enough into the void begins to look back into you. Kenny, have you ever used a dotted line? Eli asked. Dotted line? Lets you catch every other fish. Kenny rolled his eyes. A vertical sea spray blew 4 meters into the air on their port side. Humpback, Dasco called. The submarine silhouette of a barnacled baleen bull whale broke the surface and rolled onto its back from side to side, slapping and waving its pectoral fins. Just like my 50th birthday, Eli said. I was fishing with a buddy up in Winter Harbor, just hooked into a 15-pound coho when a humpy breached beside our boat and soaked him to the skin. That's pretty special, Kenny said. More special than that, Eli continued. When he slid back into the ocean, he left a rainbow behind him. Happy birthday, Eli, Das offered. That's what my buddy said. The tip of Dasco's rod groaned and genuflected in one large flow. Reel, Kenny shouted. Reel! Dasco reeled, slow and forceful and with purpose, for what was on the other end of his line was massive and had just come off the bottom of the sea. The reel made a grinding noise as Dasco powered into his industrial revolution. Every turn of the handle was agony. Eli reminded him that he was trying to raise the world's largest flatfish from 25 fathoms off the ocean floor. It's the size of a barn door, he said, and it swims like one. Most fish dive belly upward and rise to the surface. It's their way of falling, but not halibut. Eli didn't have to mention that Dasco had once fought Flatty into the halibut's distorted visual range. The recognition of his fate would result in a power dive that would threaten to bring Dasco along for the ride. 15 minutes from Dasco's epiphany, the freakish flounder behemoth of slime and teeth found itself floating on the surface in the glaring light of day, one heartbeat away from the 2-handed curved gaff which, after a quick upward pull into its backside core, a third of its way back from its nose, launched it through a parabolic flight into Overkill's cockpit. Almost 60-pound, the halibut's first reaction to landing on the strange planet was to flee. Kenny had wisely hidden all his toys that might break or hurt his catch. The halibut was not grateful enough to stop flapping and flopping and thrashing and twisting and wreaking havoc on everything else. Eli and Dasco retreated towards the helm until Kenny could find the fish's brain behind the dorsal side left eye with the blunt end of his gaff. Spruce shampoo, he said. The halibut convulsed in waves, almost as undulating as those outside the cockpit. Kenny cut the soft tissue behind the gill cover to bleed the beast. He made a second cut just above the tail, all the way through the spine, tied the head and tail together so the body formed a U-shape, and left it lashed to the cleat for an hour before sliding it into the box. He hosed the cockpit thoroughly to wash away the blood. Well, that was fun, he said. Have any fishermen ever been seriously hurt by one of these leviathans? Eli asked. At least once, Kenny said. In 1973, the Juneau Empire reported that a 67-year-old solitary Alaska fisherman, Joe Cash, caught a 150-pound halibut near Kuprianof Island and got it aboard. But the flailing fish broke his leg, severed his femoral artery, and sent him crashing to the deck where he cracked 3 ribs. He managed to lash himself to the boat's winch to avoid falling overboard. But when they found his body after the boat washed ashore, he still had his fish. That's called a Pyrrhic victory, Eli said. So that's Kenny's. Now, business. If you want the Treasury of other places, it's available online on Amazon and several other platforms at a very unreasonable price of $43.21 for a limited time. You can get it here signed for $35. Similarly, if you want Kenny's Cabin, you can get it online on various platforms for an unreasonable price of $28.53. But here, only today, for a limited time, you can get it for $20. This is JB. JB is my brother-in-law from Queensland in Australia. JB's wearing pants for the first time in a month. It's just the way he rolls. JB is the bookmeister. Okay. And while I'm at it, I'd like to thank Murray Welty and John Hickman for being my IT and AV guys and my gurus in this last hour of pain and it's so horrible, man. So if you want both of them, but wait, there's more. You can have them for $50. Cash only, no checks, no credit cards, no debit cards, just cash. Which brings me to the third book, which is coming soon. It's called Poetry of the Senses, and it's about, in a very neurological way, up the hierarchy of neurology from cranial nerves to other senses and non-sense. And the one I wrote about in Fort Robin is called Falling in Love at Niagara Castle, which happened in 1980 in a Maharaja's palace cantilevered off a cliff in Himachal Pradesh. And it was pretty special. So, there's no greater light than the light that comes out of darkness. Nothing so whole as a broken heart. I've told you about what constituted the other places. I haven't said much about what the treasure really was. So, Robin was the treasure, and the book is dedicated to her. And she's now in the palliative unit at NRGH and not expected to survive the weekend. And she told me I had to do this anyway, because today is our 39th wedding anniversary. Anyway, I thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and I'd like you to meet JB. Any questions?